Hello everybody, it's me, Fuze here again, and before we get the video started, yes, I know about my glasses. Well, I looked and looked and looked, but I could not find my goggles, and I know the goggles are everything, but I could only find these glasses, and I'm sorry about that, but nevertheless, let's get on into what we are reading. I thought it would be nice to do to give you something to read and just do a little bedtime story, So what we're reading today is The Only Thing to Fear, and this is a World War II novel, and it is basically, it is basically if the Axis powers won World War II, and basically that means the Germans took over Europe and all that stuff. They took over America and just all that crazy stuff. And it's a pretty decent sized book. I've had it for a while, and I thought, hey, maybe we can read this. So I don't know how far we'll get in, depending on what time I have to head off to bed for my operations tomorrow, but we'll just read until a good time. So I wish I have my water with me, but my mask doesn't really allow me to drink water. It sucks, but something I have to deal with. So let's get into the book. Nice little opening right there. I've never read this before, so. Okie dokie. Chapter 1. The Nazis always arrived on schedule. Today would be no exception. At 4 o'clock sharp, Zara St. James, is that Sergeant? That is Saint. I am not very good at the English, but I am learning. I'm gonna say it's Sergeant. I think it is Sergeant. Zara Sergeant James gripped the sides of her canteen, her dark eyes fixed on the Sentinel flag flying towards her. He soared across the cloud-ridden sky, zipping through the breeze with his arms locked in front of him, like a superhero from an old comic. But there is nothing heroic about him. As the Sentinel neared the fields, he dipped down so low that Zara could see the rifle looped over his shoulder and the fist-sized swastika on his olive-green uniform. His golden hair flapped in the chilly April wind, cementing the look of the prized Aryan soldier. Sturdy frame, snowy skin, Adolf Hitler's shining legacy. Not you again, Zara whispered. The corners of her mouth tightened with worry. Twice this week she had noticed him patrolling the farm, always around 4 o'clock. One visit was routine. 2, a bit alarming. A 3rd can mean trouble, possibly an interrogation, or worse. Zara's worry sank deeper, and as the Sentinel headed straight for the farm, he skimmed over the Shenandoah hills, which were bursting with fresh spring leaves. Then his gaze swept over the St. James land, scanning the worn-looking house and the decades-old barn, and finally setting on Zara, who stood at the edge of the rain-soaked fields. This is actually a really descriptive book so far. I like it, and that was only page 1. He slowed to a stop. Heil Hitler, he shouted in a crisp German, hovering 30 feet above her head. Zara's heartbeat clattered, but she stretched out her arm in the proper salute, just as her mother had taught her years ago. Heil Hitler, she replied. Her own German was passable due to the mandatory classes in primary school, but her accent had always been atrocious, which didn't bother her in the least. On most days, She rather enjoyed offending the Germans' delicate ears, one of the few crimes they couldn't beat her for. But now she has made sure to, and like I said, I am not too good at the English. But now she has made sure to enunciate each syllable. She didn't want any trouble. The sentinel saluted in return. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer, he barked out. I'm actually quite good at German. Kind of surprised. He barked out the Nazi motto, one people, one empire, one leader. Her breath grew tight. At this distance, Zara could see the 3 lightning bolts printed on the side of his helmet, the symbol of the German Anomaly Division, the most elite and the most frightening branch of the Nazi military. The division has been the brainchild of Führer Adolf Hitler, and an entire regiment composed of genetically alerted soldiers who could crush their enemies with their superpowered fist, and those fists had changed the world. Zara's gaze slunk towards the farmhouse, still unsure why the sentinel had stopped by. Please don't be here for a search, she thought desperately. She wished she could warn her uncle somehow. Hide the radio, she'd tell him. But then the sentinel landed on the field, his boots flattening an onion sprout, blocking the house from her view. Your name, girl? He demanded. She forced herself to look up at him. Zara Sergeant James, mein Herr, age 16. And where are you from? Zara grimaced. She had heard that question enough times to know that he wasn't asking where she had been born, which was right here in the Shenandoah Valley. He wanted to know her lineage, where she had gotten her black hair and sable eyes in this rural mountain town. I'm English on my mother's side, Zara said slowly. Her chest squeezed at the mention of her mom, and she wondered where his questioning was leading. And Japanese on my father's. The Empire of Japan, His eyes skimmed over her sun-darkened skin, loitering over her sweaty second-hand shirt, and drifting towards her hips. His mouth curved into a smile. A sour taste bloomed on Zara's tongue. She knew that the smile and what it meant. She knew that smile and what it meant. Most Germans sniffed at her half-breed stock. She was an Untermensch, a subhuman, like the Polish and blacks, and any mixed-race persons, only fit for factory and farm work. But not everyone scorned the color of her skin. There were few townspeople, always men, and it seemed, whose gazes lingered on the shape of her eyes, at the slight curve of her hungry waist, like the sentinel was doing now. Zara's thoughts hit a tailspin. She could use her fist as a weapon, but that wouldn't be much against the sentinel. Or she could scream, but there were acres between her and her uncle. Only the cows would hear her from here. That left her with only one last option, but Uncle Red's warning drilled through her head. No one can know about what you can do, he had told her countless times. If the Nazis found out, they'd haul you off to one of their labs or labor camps, or a grave. The sentinel stepped forward, that smile of his arching. Zara's fingers tightened around her canteen, ready to swing at his head. But then he pulled out a stack of papers from his pocket instead. He tossed one in the dirt. An announcement from Fort Goring, he said, referring to the Nazi citadel a few miles up the road, where thousands of soldiers were stationed. Pick it up. Eyes wary, Zara retrieved the paper and ignored his grin at her obedience. The fort soldiers must have been ordered to distribute those flyers across the township, and unfortunately for Zara, the sentinel had decided to hand-deliver hers. She scanned the paper's contents. From the Office of Command, Fort Goring, Shenandoah Division, Eastern American Territories. At 17 hours Eastern Time, all residents of the Greenfield Township are required at the courthouse square. An announcement will be made shortly thereafter, broadcasted live from Berlin. Attendance is mandatory. Taking a quick break from the book. I believe that I'm going to stop at chapter 2, maybe. I don't know. Depends how much time we have. Let's continue on. This is a very good book. A dozen questions ripped through Zara's mind. Most announcements from Berlin, treaties signed, battles won, were aired on the evening news reports or printed in the state-run newspaper. Only a handful merited a live broadcast, let alone mandatory attendance. Zara still remembered the first announcement she had attended, back when her mother was alive. All of Greenfield had met in the square to celebrate the birth of Johann Hitler, the son of the current Führer, Dieter Hitler. The entire Nazi empire, from Berlin to Brussels, from the American coast to the North African shores, was forced to salute the newest addition to the Hitler dynasty. The great-great-grandson of Adolf himself, Zara's mother had saluted dutifully to duty. But a soldier struck her anyway for wearing muddy boots to such a sacred event. She had apologized immediately, but she never flinched from the hit. Years later, that memory was still stuck with Zara. Her mother standing tall, the bravest woman in all of Greenfield. The ache of missing her never went away. Zara wondered what this new announcement would bring. Perhaps Dieter's wife had squeezed out another child. Or maybe the Führer had taken over the Italian Dakotas. The Italian economy had teetered on the brink of collapse since Prime Minister Benito Mussolini III came into power a decade ago. He may have sold the Dakotas along with the Canadian lands for a desperate price. Why are you still standing here, little Mischling? The Sentinel said, cutting into her thoughts. Zara tacked on a polite smile. My apologies, mynheer. His jewel blue eyes looked at her up and down. See to it that you aren't late. I'll be watching. Her cheeks burned, but she wouldn't dare say a word. Instead, she quickly turned on her heel while the Sentinel launched into the clouds. Only then did Zara shudder. Mischling, she muttered. It was a German term for mixed blood, usually like a slur, but the Sentinel hadn't made it sound that way. Her fingers had itched to slap him, but an Untermusch like her would get jailed for that, or sent to the Front Royal labor camp 30 miles east. With another shudder, Zara hurried to the house, abandoning the onions for tomorrow. She leapt over the infant rows of corn and ran past the faded barn that her great-great-grandparents had built before the war. Oh no. In the early 40s. The old United States had been a beacon of hope, of freedom, so vast it could swallow you whole. But that America had long been destroyed, its cities flattened by the German anomaly division. After President Roosevelt was executed in early 1944, the Axis powers had cut the country like a giant birthday cake. The Nazis had claimed the fertile lands east of the Mississippi River, while the Japanese took over the west, leaving the Italians with the Dakota Plains, a consolation prize for their anemic role in the fighting. Decades had passed since then, and the Germans still had a tight rein over the territories. But Zara yearned for more than a life of hard labor and Hail Hitlers. One day, she thought, clutching the paper in her hand, one day her uncle would let her join the Revolutionary Alliance, an underground resistance group that had fought the empire for decades. It was originally formed by the last remnants of the U.S. military who had escaped Washington, D.C. after Roosevelt's execution. Back then, its members had numbered in the millions, many of them former soldiers. But with the U.S. military long disbanded, the alliance now relied on civilian recruits, like Uncle Red, and hopefully Zara. If only she could join the rebels, then she could help push the Nazis back to Germany. Or, even better, crush the regime altogether. Maybe then, finally, her mother's death would have justice. As her lungs puffed, Zara burst through the kitchen door of the rundown farmhouse to find her uncle underneath the kitchen sink, a foot-long wrench in his hand. A water pipe had burst that morning, the second one that month, and he had stayed behind to fix it. Otherwise, he would have been out in the fields as usual, planting eggplant and digging holes for the cabbage. "What happened?" said Uncle Red. He set the wrench on the floor and pulled himself up. "Did the cow get sick again?" Zara peered into his bearded face. Her uncle wasn't very tall, but she stood a whole head shorter than him. "The cow's fine. Here, look at this." She handed him the notice. His green eyes, the same color as Zara's mother, flared wide. "An announcement? Now? Do you know what this is about?" Her voice dropped low out of habit. They never knew who could be watching them. "Maybe the Alliance sent you a message." "No, we haven't got to the thing since last week. This has to be serious if attendance is mandatory." Uncle Red ran a tense hand through his thinning auburn hair. As he neared 40, he seemed to be losing more of it each year. "I know. Remember to stick close to me. The square will be swarming with soldiers. You can't lose control. Do you understand?" Zara bristled. "I haven't had an episode in years. Doesn't hurt to be cautious. I'm always cautious." He looked doubtful, but said nothing more about it. "Grab the keys. We don't want to keep the Fuhrer waiting." So, let me see. This is pretty deep so far. I like this book. Let's see how long chapter 2 is. Chapter 2 is a long boy. I don't know. Oh man, that is all chapter 2 right there, and that is a lot of pages. I'm going to stop there, and I want you guys to just leave a comment down below, and I just want to know, do you guys want me to read more of this book? I'll read it on my own if you guys don't want me to read it, but that is up to you. But it's a long book, as you can see. And I actually got this book at a scholastic book fair that my son had gone to, and he brought this back home and said, hey Papa, this is a war book, and I thought you'd like it." And I chuckled a little bit, and I was like, "Oh wow, that's pretty nice of you, thank you." And I never really got around to reading it, but now that I work in the field, I don't really get much time, and it's nice to sit down and have chats with you. But yes, I've kind of peered in the book a little bit, and it looks like a very, very deep story to it. And before we go, I think I'll just indulge in some just book sounds, just page 10. Indulge in some page turning and just all that stuff. Yeah, this book is a total of how many pages? 282 pages of reading. That is absolutely crazy. But alas, I need to get to bed it is getting a little bit late. Here, hold on. Yep, it is getting pretty late. So I had a very good time talking to you and reading you a short story. Not even a short story, this is a long story. But alas, I must go now. I have a special operation tomorrow. I hope that we see you again. What is your name, by the way? Nice to meet you. All right. It has been great to talking to you, and I hope to see you again sometime soon. See ya.